My name is Right. I am the voice of reason. I speak for the Last Crusade. What is truth is a question asked by figures as diverse as Socrates and Pontius Pilate. It is noteworthy that hemlock was the fate of the first and crucifixion was the decree of the second. Socrates was still asking questions when he died. Pilate had the living truth incarnate standing trial before him, but he did not wait for an answer to his question. What is truth? Whatever else it is, truth is unwelcome. It behooves us to reflect on the nature of truth and mankind's hatred of it. This is a perennial defect of the human race. This hatred of truth is more inflamed in some men than in others, more in some nations and eras than others. Now we dwell in days when the hatred of truth is lauded as a virtue, truthfulness blackened by many evil names, called extremism, partisanship, mean-spiritedness, and love of truth is equated to terrorism. Truth is denounced as inappropriate, as bigotry, as inciting violence. Speaking truth is held to be as culpable as the physical violence it allegedly provokes, and for this reason, to trample truth with violence and the threat of violence is called laudable. Truth makes moral cripples feel unsafe. These feelings are not based in reality, but are held to carry more weight than reality carries. On school campuses and elsewhere, places where free words of free men are not to be tolerated, ironically called safe spaces, are erected to banish truth and crucify it. And yet, oddly, even in the midst of their unparalleled victory, the corrupt lords of this world cannot relax and enjoy their ovations and triumphs. Truth, crucified, has an uncomfortable habit of leaving the tomb where it was thought safely buried empty and being seen again. Even those who do not believe such resurrections are possible would be wise to hope in years to come that a supernatural revival might yet be seen. Without that hope, there can be no hope. In this generation, phobic hatred of truth has reached a paramount and unparalleled supremacy. This generation is the first in all human history which embraces nihilism as its fundamental worldview and fundamental philosophy and fundamental thought. Nihilism is the worldview that says no worldview is correct. Nihilism is the philosophy that says no philosophy is correct. Nihilism is the thought that stops thinking. You might think of a nihilist as one who wears black lipstick or black turtleneck sweater, sitting in a cafe, smoking European cigarettes, bemoaning the joyless meaninglessness of life. This is not actually what nihilism is. Nihilism is a philosophical posture, namely a theory of epistemology, which says that there are no overarching truths, no general truths, no real and solid truths open to man. It is, in effect, a metaphysical statement that all metaphysical statements are untrue. Now, this conclusion is not one anyone can reach by any reasoning process, for it contradicts itself. Pointing out the contradiction has no effect on the devout nihilist. One cannot be reasoned out of a belief one was never reasoned into. Nihilism is a logical halt state, a dead end from which there is no worldly means of escape, for no reasoning can persuade a man who reasons that all reasoning is in vain. When a man prods out his eyes with his own thumbs, there is no sight to show him that will reveal to him that light is better than darkness. He can no longer see the light, even if he would. If not by reason, how comes any man or any nation to embrace this hatred of truth as a paramount truth? A central truth known since ancient days in the West is that evil is nothing. An evil is a defect or a lapse in what would otherwise be whole and good. For example, the vice called recklessness is the virtue of courage combined with the defect of prudence. The vice called cowardice is the virtue of prudence combined with the defect of justice and a lack of manhood. Bigotry and partisanship are virtues of philos, that is, of particular brotherly love, love for one's tribe, clan, nation, race, or party, combined with a lapse of justice or temperance, a defect of agape, that is, of universal or heavenly love, for those fellow men beyond the bounds of party or tribe. Adultery is eros, romantic love, but directed to an improper object or in violation of the sacred oaths of marriage. Even this sin, which shatters families and ruins lives, would be no sin if the couple were lawfully wed to one another. and so on for any vice or sin one cares to name. If it were drawn as a picture, vice would not be a blank page. It would be the portrait of an otherwise handsome face, with merely one feature out of true, a nose like a cassava melon, bare lips eaten away with loathsome disease to reveal the teeth of a skull beneath, one eye thrice the diameter of another, or some other malign feature or misproportion. Imagine a villain in a story who lacks all the virtues Boy Scouts emulate. He would be untrustworthy, disloyal, unhelpful, unfriendly, discourteous, unkind, disobedient, morose, prodigal, cowardly, dirty, and impious. One thinks of Gollum from Tolkien or Mime from Wagner. Yet even these wretches are only a threat to the hero due to some virtue of their crafty cunning or patient perseverance, which enables the villain to lead the hero into a spider's lair or to drink a poisoned draught. The vice by itself is nothing. Vice is only dangerous when it bends some strong virtue to its twisted ends. Hence, the stronger the virtue being twisted, the greater the danger. The moral universe is arranged in a hierarchy of goods, with some elevated above others. Eating when one hungers is a good thing, but human life is also a good thing. Eating one's own children to sate a hunger is not a good thing, because it places a lesser good, the satisfaction of hunger, above a greater good, the preservation of human life. Because vice is always a defect or disproportion of virtue, vice always disguises itself as a virtue. Wrath is disguised as justice, avarice as prudence, lust as being fun-loving. For this reason, none of the haters of truth say he hates the truth. Perhaps the more unreflective souls among them are not even aware of their own stance and its implications, and would be surprised to hear themselves so named. In the same way that the advocates of prenatal infanticide never actually name the act they are defending, not even in their own thoughts, the hatred of truth is buried under a gibberish of euphemisms, misdirection, and nonsense words. Hence, they cloak their love of dishonesty under a concern for some lesser thing. At times, truth is too harsh to be heard at weddings or festivities, or too harsh to be heard by a child. We all admit this. And so even a truthful man is tempted to be silent out of courtesy, so as not to spoil a festive levity, or not to burden a child with weighty truths his tender years cannot shoulder. Now, courtesy is also one of those things that the modern generation loathes and despises, and it is ironic, to say the least, that any persons who harvest the organs of murdered unborn babies for the black market, or who support this practice, claim to have gentle feelings toward their own young. In the current generation, courtesy is banished in the name of some good, still lesser yet, authenticity, or perhaps a democratic ease of manners or spontaneity. In its place, the generation erects political correctness, which brings courtesy into the political realm. Nowadays, speaking a bad name to a minority or a woman is not a matter for a gentleman's upbringing to upbraid in himself, or a gentleman's fist in the mouth to correct in others. Instead, impolite speech is upbraided on the grounds that it forms the basis of a political evil called oppression or exploitation. This leads to naked absurdities, such as where criticizing a mulatto president occupying the most powerful office in the world for unwise, corrupt abuse of taxing power against political enemies is called oppression, but not by him, but of him. Once the consensus of society gullibly swallows this absurdity, it is easy enough to rule all truths inconvenient to the self-esteem, political ambition, or mental disorders of those the consensus favors. These are ruled to be impolite, hence ruled to be an act of political oppression. The weasel word used here is inappropriate. The core of the nihilist, truth-hating philosophy of the modern generation is never to allow the truth or falsehood of anything to be debated nor discussed. But something, anything, must be said to allow the nihilists to shout down any truths spoken where someone might hear. Having ruled out any discussion on the merits of the case, the only thing left is to impeach the witness giving the testimony. From this springs all the nauseating and servile cult worship of experts and expertise which dominates the feverish brains of modern thinkers and of postmodern post-thinkers. Now keep in mind, the actual credentials of the actual experts are never discussed, nor is their work examined, nor are their conclusions questioned. Instead, the motives of anonymous witnesses, if favorable, are trumpeted as being pure, and therefore worthy of credulity, and the motives of anonymous witnesses, if unfavorable, are subjected to slander in a wild cacophony of accusations rooted in nothing. Karl Marx did not begin the practice of uttering unsupported accusations against political opponents, nor of dismissing all differences of opinion as being no more than political opposition in disguise, but he is the first, at least among influential writers in the West, to make this a central stanchion of his philosophical system and worldview. Marxism has built into its foundations the accusation that all who oppose Marxism are motivated by an ideological superstructure of class self interest, or by false consciousness, or by some other moral or mental defect. Modern political correctness, which takes its major stream of thought from the fountainhead of Marx, codifies this same unconvincing sort of slander instead of answer to respond to any criticism also into its very foundations. It is an axiom of political correctness that no possible honest objection, even a mistaken one, can be voiced to political correctness. The goodness and enlightenment of political correctness are held to be too obvious to need any defense, clothed in supernatural beauty of a truth that should make itself self-evident. Only evil goblins, such as philosophers, Christians, and Republicans, believe otherwise, and this is due to their various mental and moral shortcomings. To disagree with political correctness is not taken as a sign of an independent mind waiting to be convinced by naked evidence, but as the sign of a soul reprobate and corrupt beyond the reach of words. Now, the irony of political correctness rests on a foundation of metaphysical nihilism, that is, on the foundational belief that no solid truth exists for the mind of man to know, and therefore any man claiming to know any truth is guilty of arrogance, of special pleading, of bigotry, or of blind party loyalty. And this foundation not only denies that self-evident truth exists, but that any truth at all exists, obvious or subtle. So therefore the moderns do not and cannot argue a case. Many have never heard any issue argued in good faith in all their lives. Where would anyone hear such a debate these days? Today the panel will be debating the question, are all Trump supporters irredeemable and deplorable, bigoted, racist, Nazi, mass-murdering, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal subhumans who must never be allowed to speak in public? Here, speaking in public, is the moronic but bigoted extremist, Mr. Literally Hitler, whom we have invited here to be interrupted and shouted down by the panel. Mr. Hitler, how do you justify your rank and stinking evil? Such is the nature of modern debate. No one who has not been subject to one of these storms of slander and libel by major international newspapers is likely to be able to grasp or to believe the sheer magnitude of bile involved, or the utter lack of the slightest scruple either in the slanderer or in his willing audience. They have no interest whatsoever in the truth. They do not care about right and wrong, reason or rationality, and they have no shame. It is a raging mob if a mob were too craven to face whom they slander in person. It is a mob of cowards. What provokes such reckless hatred? Obviously, it is not any real wrongdoing done by the unfortunate who is offered them as the victim of the day. Less than 1 out of 100 in the mob would have ever heard the name of whomever they are called upon today to be crucified. The priest does not know the name of the goat offered as the scapegoat. The real person does not matter to the mob, nor does reality matter. It is precisely to escape from reality that all this is done. So then, why is the hatred so deep, so bitter? And why are the accusations so wild and meaningless? Well, the reason for the wildness of the accusations is clear enough. If one is accused of something which may or may not be true, such as that you perched a dog on top of your car 20 years ago, then the matter is still within range of rational discussion. There may be witnesses or evidence available to prove or disprove the point. One can introduce facts to show whether this did or did not happen, and whether it was justified if it did happen. But if someone accuses you of being a witch, or better yet, someone accuses you of being a reactionary extremist, accuses you of being a four-sided triangle, or a Frumius Bandersnatch, or something else that cannot and does not exist, then discussion is impossible, for there is no evidence to produce and no defense to raise. In truth, there are no Bandersnatches and there are no homophobes. No one in the history of the world actually suffers from an uncontrollable, psychopathic fear of unnatural sexual acts. And yet each time a man with wholesome taste is called a homophobe, this absurd falsehood is promoted yet again. Like accusing someone of being a witch, it is an accusation issued not because anyone in earshot is likely to think it true. It is ceremonial. It is a thing done for its own sake. It is erected as a banner on a staff for all those loyal to this season's latest fashion in immorality disguised as piety to salute. It is not prompted by any pity for those who suffer same-sex attraction, for those who do pity such folk hate the Muslim law that commands the execution of homosexuals, and they hate the Muslims who follow it. No, the accusation of phobic fear in sodomites is not true, and is not prompted by pity. It is an excuse for the 2-minute hate. Leveling absurd and unbelievable accusations against all critics is not a defect of the politically correct system, but its central feature. For political correctness is not a philosophy, political and otherwise. It is, rather, a call for the death of rational political discourse by shouting down all opposition, by libeling, outlawing, and eventually killing any who are feared to harbor scruples, or whose lives prove inconvenient to the party. If this seems an incredible statement, please recall the history of the 20th century. Recall the 100 million innocent lives ended by the policies of the left, both the fascists and communists. Please recall the news, as recent as yesterday's, telling of renewed riots by fascists calling themselves anti-fascists. These recollections, without any further embellishment, are testimony sufficient to make the statement seem credible. If you have never heard the desire for your bloody death voiced by partisans of the brave new world this modern generation expects to inherit once they have torn all tradition, law, decency, nobility apart, and have trampled crucifix, all I can suggest is that you have not come to their attention yet. Your loyalty to their precepts will not save you. They turn on and eat their own, like Saturn. So why is the hate so hateful? The question is mysterious, for its roots are in the dark depth of the corrupt human heart, whose tangled roots only heaven knows. But as far as the human eye can pierce, we can say, the whole structure on truth has a nothingness at its core and a nothingness at its heart. It serves no purpose and has no logic to it. However, it does serve in the short term as something like a psychological defense mechanism. As said above, the mechanism operates by putting some good but low thing in the place of a good but higher thing, so that an undue priority is placed on a trifle, like courtesy, while an undue low priority is placed on a consummate and paramount good, like truth. The two are then alleged to be in conflict, and the paramount is sacrificed in the name of the trifle. The point is not to elevate the trifle. The point is to dethrone the paramount. A man, or for that matter a nation or generation, allegedly caring nothing for the truth, does not indeed want to hear lies, nor to be tricked nor defrauded. Flattery is what is being sought, because truth will not serve, and pride is what drives the craving for flattery. What else? This generation is rich and powerful beyond the dreams of any pharaoh of old, flooded with luxuries and ease not even millionaires and absolute monarchs of 100 years ago could have possessed. This generation is also corrupt in a fashion that silences comparison. Not even the pagans, who had temple prostitution or who proffered young boys for emperors to sodomize, ever legally rendered the bonds of marriage to be of no effect, as our laws have done. The smoking, blood-soaked pyramids of the Aztecs never slaughtered, nor did the fiery brass idol of Moloch consume as many children as are annually sacrificed in abortion mills to the secular gods of feminism, casual sex, and hatred of human population, or to the love of selfish convenience. Reintroducing truth into life would put all things back into due proportion and back into their proper place. This would shatter the idols to which millions of men have devoted the majority of their lives with diligently self-hoodwinked and rigorously closed-eyed and closed-minded zealotry. Consider philosophers and professors whose whole life work is gibberish and rubbish. If truth were introduced back into life, they would be exposed to their own searing conscience and left without excuse. Consider criminals, both those in jail and those in the halls of power, crooks occupying the judges' benches and the governor's mansions. They would be stripped naked of the lies that act as life preservers to them, namely, first, the lie that all laws are man-made and that to bend or break them is laudable work, and second, the lie that no next life awaits them where they will answer for their misdeeds. Consider artists whose entire life's work, and indeed their whole soul and whole self-esteem, consists of nothing but belittling greater works whom they cannot match. Consider writers whose whole output consists of marring characters they cannot create. Such false frauds would be blinded by a truth that showed them their true position in history, not the crown of the muses, but a louse in their hair. For such people, pride is self, and self is pride. Humility to them is humiliation not to be endured. The burden of pride is one from which the truth would set them free. It is a freedom they hate, as Christian men hate hell. Every man who has ever envied his betters, and had no one but himself to blame, would be left without anyone to blame. The precious, endlessly precious scapegoats, more dear than life itself to such souls, scapegoats of the patriarchy, of institutional racism, of capitalism or Jewry, or whatever make-believe Illuminati their fevered dreams have produced this season, would be torn from their feeble, groping fingers. The lamp of truth would shine on the looking-glass and show them their own faces. Lust would be left without excuse, and would bow to the boundaries of chastity, and half the starlets in Hollywood would find themselves without a profession. Gluttony, the national sin America loves more than any other, would be bridled by temperance and thrift, and the cunning advertising agencies pimping useless dross would toss themselves for shame out of the upper windows of the towers of Madison Avenue. Avarice, a sin we have made into a virtue, would be revealed in all its dangerous ugliness if the truth were unleashed. Capitalists and socialists disagree on the fine point of whether an individual has a right to the goods and wealth produced of his own labor, or whether the goods should be given to a despot in the name of social justice and wasted. But they agree that acquiring worldly goods is itself a good. They agree that to ask whether immortal souls should take as their highest good not the improvement of the soul, but the acquisition of wealth that perishes, to be a question outside the bounds of economics and politics to address. So they agree not to ask. In the dull-witted dark age in which we currently trudge, the question of the worth of wealth is rarely asked and very rarely answered with an honest answer. Wrath, that warmest of wines, so intoxicating to all feelings of self-justification, would be drenched in the icy mountain stream of fair-mindedness, courtesy, chivalry, and justice, and even deadly enemies would be given their say and their due. And what would newspaper editorials address then, with no false issues to inflame us to ire? The warm bed of sloth, which dismisses all religious longings and philosophical speculations as boring or pointless, would likewise be jarred awake by the angelic trumpets of enthusiasm. It would be like the revolution of Copernicus if the entire generation of self-centered spiritual pygmies discovered that the world did not revolve around them. Sloth is a strange name for a sin that is so energetic, so easily bored, so restless. Sloth is the urgent and painful desire not to think about one's duty to heaven and one's duty to one's fellow man. It is addiction to distraction. And who knows what might happen if truth were restored to her proper throne and crown? The yammering clamor of sloth might cease, and the deafness of pride might have its ear opened. Selfishness might be seen for the loathsome venereal disease it really is, or the flab of gluttony might recede, never again to droop across the beltlines of America. The chaste and modern woman might discover how to love and how to be worthy of love, and the unfeminine unhappiness she embraces, allegedly to gain equality, would no longer bar her way. And the love of brother for brother might shame into silence the shameless voices calling for racism, accusing everyone and everything of racism, or the even more shameless calling for new forms of racism as a cure for racism. Who knows what might happen if truth draws her shining sword? Forgiveness might break out like a benevolent plague. Hard as it will be for my atheist and agnostic friends to hear, my witches and New Age mystics, but you have no answer for this. Christ is the answer. He is the truth. Christ alone can humble the proud without humiliating them. To my foes, I hurl defiance and I speak these words. You have already tried crucifying the truth once long ago atop the place of the skull.
The tree of torture you erected is now a sign and sacramental of enduring joy and of endless life. The cross of joy you cannot touch, and the life you cannot end. You have no weapon that can harm the truth. The spear of the centurion who pierced the side of Christ becomes a sacred relic and serves us, not you, and grants victory after victory. How does one fight a truth that overcomes death? You have already tried to bury the truth in a tomb, but the stone has been rolled away from the cave. No footprints of the body they carried into the tomb are in the dust going toward the mouth, but a pair of prints bearing the marks of iron nails lead away. They go up the side of the Mount of Olives, but not down again. Join us, love truth, find joy. Follow those feet where they lead.